companies are forced. There is no choice but to evolve to AI at the core. The fundamentals in terms of corporate productivity are so dramatic that you can't remain competitive and want to stick your head in the sand and think about and believe that somehow you don't need to be AI at the core over time, right? It'd be like saying a Fortune 500 company doesn't really need an internet presence, right? That sounds on its face ridiculous. This will sound even more ridiculous 5 years from now when a company is not heavily invested into AI. So you start on that journey, and we see it all the time in the engagements that we have. And you have in management, executive management has a real problem.
Hi, it's Joshua Feinberg, host of the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, and I'm thrilled today to be welcoming a very special guest. Joining me today is Armando Viteri, who is president and CEO of Neubloc, based in Scottsdale, Arizona. Armando, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, and I'm very flattered that I'm a very special guest. This is awesome.
That's terrific. Armando, how did you end up in this place where you're leading Neubloc, specializing in AI development, machine learning, IoT? Was this something that you've been thinking about for a number of years? Was this something that you've been planning on throughout your whole career?
No.
Did you have a fascination with technology growing up?
Just the opposite. We were brought into it kicking and screaming. What happened is that although I did first, when I in college, I did first gen AI, so kind of the era of expert systems and symbolic AI and that kind of stuff, long ago, back when I had hair. However, I'd been out of that space for a very long time, and about 20 years ago, I wound up joining a kind of a boutique pass the hat around private equity group that wound up, and as part of the duties there, I wound up becoming the CEO of Neubloc, which I think at the time had 4 employees, something like that. And so we came to this in a very backwards way. Originally, what happened is that Neubloc was always kind of a place for doing technology, heavy lifting kind of stuff, not exactly the kind of firm that you'd go to get an updated, web game or something like that. It was more kind of technically difficult challenges in the kind of projects that we took on. And in that process of going after technical challenges, we wound up becoming, among other things, becoming the primary third-party independent development platform for storage devices. So today, our firmware probably, I'm guessing here, but it's on the order of 56% of the global cloud runs on firmware that we developed in those storage devices. So we kind of came in originally into the whole data center world from kind of the bottom of the supply chain, firmware embedded in those storage devices. However, come 2016, 2017, my CTO, a guy by the name of Dr. Nissim, Ozer, very well-respected AI technologist, who had joined the partnership some number of years before because he was interested in working with the group of partners that we were. He always missed AI. He holds his PhD in AI. He's a well-respected AI technologist. So around 2016, 2017, he's the one that came back to the partnership and said, we've seen AI come and go over the years, peaks and valleys. Somehow this one feels different, and we need to double down and invest in it. And that was largely based by a lot of, if you remember back at that period, a lot of the successes that DeepMind was having. Some pretty remarkable ones like AlphaFold, AlphaGo, et cetera. Earlier than that, you had Watson coming along with a very different method. You had Deep Blue doing chess, superhuman levels of chess, et cetera. So you're seeing some progress all of a sudden after AI being declared dead multiple times. All of a sudden there was these rays of light. So we wound up at the time focusing on Fortune 5, well, actually really global 1,000 companies doing departmental level implementations of AI which is where AI was at the time in the 2016, 17 area. People weren't talking about how am I going to take my Fortune 500 company and how do I completely rejigger it to be AI at the core, which is now a pretty common conversation, right? Back then, it was more like a director or VP at a large company saying, geez, I have this specific problem. Can AI help me? And so we did a lot of those implementations for a number of Global 1000 companies. And obviously 2022 rolls around, Gen AI comes in the scene in the form of ChatGPT, and then the world changed for us. So at that point, many of our customers were pretty unsophisticated, even though they were senior levels in large companies. This whole AI thing was brand new. So part of us turned into an education company, providing executive level education about what you could and could not do in AI, and then kind of strategic roadmap development, et cetera, toward the concept of how do you take a traditional firm, move into AI enabled, and then move it into AI at the core. So that was an overly long-winded answer, but basically at this point, somehow, weird way, we wound up at the bottom of the supply chain, providing firmware in those disk drives, to the top of the supply chain, doing enterprise scale AI, and leave it to the data center vendors in the middle to provide all the plumbing that you need to make all that stack work.
So if you think about, you have the data center operators, you have the technology companies, of which storage is like one of 22 different categories of tech companies that we follow. You're a supplier of the storage companies, but you've also managed to get direct relationships with enterprise clients, specifically consulting on
implementation.
AI.
It's consulting, but obviously the real end goal is to do the implementation work for these AI systems. So we are in a sense, we're a supplier to these data centers as well as a consumer of these data centers. So we goes into and we goes out in the stack.
So, given all of this, with the many chapters of your career and the really interesting companies that you've worked with along the way, what advice would you offer to someone that's at the very early stages of trying to figure out what they want to do? Maybe it's a son or daughter, a niece or nephew, a teen who comes to you and they've heard about your career, Armando, and they're looking for some advice about what they should think about for careers in technology, especially in some of the less technical areas of technology. They may not be interested in engineering or development. They're curious about what some of these client-facing roles, client-facing careers may look like that support the data center ecosystem.
Man, this is, you're going to start off with a really hard question like that? Really? Here, I'll give it from an example from my personal life. My daughter, Chicago paleontologist, wound up getting her PhD in essentially ecobiology from Stanford, and now works as the lead biologist in the largest plot of land that Nature Conservancy manages in California. By contrast, my son, MIT AI undergrad, currently in the process of, he's probably a year away from getting his PhD, also from Stanford, in AI. Between the two of them, Maria is much less worried than Scott is about what the future holds in terms of their career, even though he's an AI PhD, because things in his world are going to change much more dramatically than things will change in her world, right? You're always going to need that lead biologist. For an AI guy or technologist guy, the whole landscape, the whole kind of fundamentals about, geez, if you wind up tracking into this career, for sure, you're going to wind up with a really fulfilling career. All those basics are going to wind up changing. The only thing I can give for an answer is a little bit kind of mushy. What I would say is that it is actually, in the end, it's a really good thing that hard skills such as programming wind up becoming less important, and soft skills, like you would find in lots of roles in a large company, those kind of soft skills will wind up becoming more valuable. As you get people, engineers are notoriously bad at communicating, right? Whereas many other disciplines inside of a company that have people that have really good soft skills, they naturally transition into roles like project management, product management, et cetera, where you really need those people. You need the EQ to be able to extract information out of people. So I think that's what winds up naturally happening, is this idea of a rebalancing between hard and soft skills as AI takes more and more of kind of the drudgery part of programming away, by providing more and more tools for auto code generation. And those tools are they're okay now, right? But clearly in the next 5 or 10 years, they become very good, certainly within the span of a career.
What's super fascinating about that also is where you're mentioning a more technical subject matter expert, like what your son's studying in school, and that classic career of struggling on people finding the soft skills that they need to be effective. So many people that have been in a sales or marketing or product or channel partnerships career over the last 15, 20 years, a lot of buyer preferences have changed so much, and people are doing so much research that journey keeps getting pushed out further and further for more self-service. And their only way back in many cases, is to show up looking a lot more like a consultant or a teacher or a trusted advisor, a subject matter expert, and not just look like the traditional vendor title, not just looking like an account executive or a sales development rep or something like that. And that changes the nature of who gets hired. It changes the nature of upskilling, cross-training.
Well, it's hard. Well, a couple of things on this topic. I am on the advisory board for this one NSF-founded grant, where what they're trying to build is a curricula, a 2-year community college curricula for people that want to be able to have a career in AI, right? And what I kind of keep encouraging that group is to think about it. One thing is to think about that 18-year-old that's going into community college. Another thing to think about that's equally or more important is you have all of these people coming from, for example, sales roles that have excellent soft skills. They're the very pinnacle of soft skills, right? They know how to read people. And how do you take that cadre of people as a traditional sales role becomes less important? How do you take that cadre of people and morph them over into other areas that are really very valuable, especially in a time where the AI tools would assist them to augment their often lacking hard skills, right? So what I've been encouraging this group to really think about is think about not just the 18-year-old, think about the mid-career executive, because you do have a massive problem being faced by certainly most large corporations, let's just say corporations in general in the corner ice cream store, that let's suppose companies are forced. There is no choice but to evolve to AI at the core. The fundamentals in terms of corporate productivity are so dramatic that you can't remain competitive and want to stick your head in the sand and think about and believe that somehow you don't need to be AI at the core over time, right? It'd be like saying a Fortune 500 company doesn't really need an internet presence, right? That sounds on its face ridiculous. This will sound even more ridiculous 5 years from now when a company is not heavily invested into AI.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
So you start on that journey, and we see it all the time in the engagements that we have. And you have in management, executive management has a real problem, because they either at the beginning of the journey, what they do is they do a corporate-wide edict that says, we will not have any layoffs as a result of implementing AI in this company. Okay, so you have those. And as a result of that promise, you wind up with a lot of interest in AI and a lot of kind of demand for AI, bubbles up from the bottom up to the top because of that corporate edict, right? You have the other extreme that executive management just kind of ignores the issue and forces AI down the throats of the organization, in which case there's going to be some middle manager, let's call him Joe, because there was a Joe, a real Joe, in a large corporation that shall remain unnamed. Joe says, oh, hell no. I'm never going to use that stuff. That stuff's going to replace me, right? So then you have the resistance there. You take the first company, you move that forward, and all of a sudden they have a sales force of 1,000 people that has now largely been replaced by self-serve conversational AI that, quite frankly, does a better job answering specific product questions than a sales guy would ever be able to do. So now what does the company do in that case? And by the same token, the corporation that never made any statements about their long-term commitment to their employees, well, they never even get off the starting blocks, because every AI initiative gets blocked by the Joes of the world, right? Both companies wind up with a huge strategic problem. And I don't know that I know the ultimate answer to that, but that is, at a corporate level, this transition is probably the single most important strategic set of decisions that a corporation has to make over this next 5 to 10 year period. Now, personally, I believe that there is some middle path. There's a middle path that says, yeah, we're not going to lay off people. However, we've really thought through the problem of job reskilling. We've thought about that in depth. And so here's the roadmap, because there is going to be displacement. Let's not going to bury our heads in the sand. There is going to be displacement, but we have a plan. That, to me, sounds like the most likely to be a positive outcome here.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work to do in workforce redevelopment and retraining. I see, just in the part of the data center ecosystem I spend the most time with, a lot of times sales and marketing folks, they work for a colocation operator that merges, and all of a sudden they decide they want to go leaner on marketing, or they work for a new board comes into place and they decide they want to go all in on field marketing. So someone that was in a 10% travel job now has a 50% travel requirements. Sure. This is what's causing people to leave an industry that's chronically complaining that there's talent shortages, all because nobody bothered saying to this person, like,
here's your
I get you can't travel, but could you do a fantastic job with webinars and podcasts? Or maybe you want to be the communications person for our CISO.
Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, the unstoppable force here is that marketing and sales headcount, be it field people or be it especially inside salespeople, and certainly customer support, all of those functions go down by 90% in headcount. In fact, one of our own startups, we own a portfolio of companies. One of our own startups, we had at one time 60 sales guys for this particular function. I won't describe what the function is, but it is a major supplier to companies that you would recognize. Okay, we had 60 sales guys. And initially what we did is that we did a lot of data collection and some AI analysis to be able to focus those 60 guys so that they could be more productive. And that worked well. But then the very next step was, why do we need them, right? So the very next step was that function got taken over, the entire customer interaction got taken over entirely by AI. And today, that company is a lot bigger, but only has 7 salespeople in the entire organization. But it's handling massive volume of transactions, right? That's the reality. It's a 90% reduction, right? How the corporation deals with that, how it deals with the transition, that's the complicated part.
What we see as the surface level answers on this is there's increasing specialization. They're taking teams and saying, you just deal with healthcare clients, manufacturing clients. They're splitting it up so the people that are in place can have a lot more leverage with their prospects and clients. But ultimately, the cynical Josh believes that there's a certain amount of investment going into field marketing and huge conferences because it's not palatable to send a robot to talk to people at in a convention center exhibit hall. You still need a human being.
Notice that
That also can't be offshored.
What I said is 90%, because you're right. 10% gets left that are the soft skill guys, the relationship managers. The customer facing human interaction, the guy that's going to take you out to lunch or woman that's going to take you out for a round of golf at the Phoenician, right?
I love golf.
It's a fundamental part of the sales process.
The go-to-market playbook depends on golf and poolside cabana parties.
Correct, right? So it's not 100% reduction, but it still is only 10% that you need for the people that are going to do the human connection aspect of it. So that's just kind of the reality of the transition that we're in.
Armando, when you look out into your crystal ball 2, 3, 4 years from now, how do you think your job changes in leading a company like Neubloc?
I think obviously the data storage side of what we do expands dramatically. Right, just by the nature of the number of data centers that are going in, there's not enough storage drive capacity on the planet to satisfy demand, and demand is going up. And the storage drive manufacturers in general are pretty gun shy about investing into new production capability because they've seen it's a highly cyclical market, right? So they're afraid to getting caught off again if there's ever a downturn, right? So that side of the business is going to continue to expand. I suspect that those storage drives will continue to increase in price as opposed to go down in price. Once again, it's supply demand imbalance. However, on the other side of the business, the AI, you wind up, you are in adoption. You're still in the early adopter stage of AI adoption for the enterprise, right? So I think 3 or 4 years from now is now you're into the early majority, right? And using a kind of typical market development model, kind of a Jeffrey Mooreism. That's when you're going to get to the bread and butter of what large scale AI deployment at the enterprise becomes. So it's exactly in that kind of 3 to 5 year time frame, but we're not there yet. People really, and in fact, a lot of these large companies are really struggling with the dichotomy I described before. I'm guaranteeing jobs or I'm just not going to talk about it. And then you have an awful lot of companies being sabotaged internally as these things are not handled from a change management or from, quite frankly, a human point of view.
So a lot of the storage demand today, when I talk with folks on this podcast, is still largely driven by video, and it's going to shift in the near future to LLMs, inferencing,
yes,
a lot more edge.
And well, yeah, certainly there's an emerging trend toward AI at the edge, and we do an awful lot of that kind of stuff. However, the sheer scale of data centers generically have been more like the typical cloud center, right? That's just a whole bunch of disk drives put together through a very fat pipe, right? And obviously the definition for what a data center, when people refer to data centers today, they're really talking about more like huge clusters of GPUs, in Grok's case, 200,000 of them, right? With a massive number of disk drives attached to them, et cetera. So what the composition of a data center is really quickly changing. There's a whole lot more investment going into the AI definition of a data center than there is into just increasing cloud storage capabilities.
In many cases, it's shaping up to be another global race as the current events unfold from this week, with various parts of the world trying to have AI supremacy.
Well, somebody very wise once told me, eventually everything becomes a toaster. And so, in other words, it all commoditizes, right? And so I think to a large extent, a lot of the hardware for data centers are now either commoditized or on that track. GPUs are still maybe 1, 2, 3 generations away from being commoditized, but they're on that track, right? Surprisingly, the only component that I can think of in a data center that is not commoditized is the disk drive, the hard drive. And the reason is because there's only 2.5 companies on the planet that actually know how to build a disk drive. And if you boil those companies down, you're talking about kind of at the fellow level, guys that really understand it, you're talking about dozens of people, not hundreds, in the world. So it just simply hasn't commoditized because there's so few providers and so few people that actually understand how to build one of these things, that as a result, that it is largely a duopoly today, but it's not a commodity market.
So
every other piece of data center, commodity.
As some of those folks have been there their entire careers, starting at the dawn of the PC, are we in a panic mode yet where there's a significant percentage of those few dozen people who are nearing retirement?
Oh my God, I live that one every day.
Yeah.
Because you're right. My most senior guys in storage devices, they're getting a bit older.
Yeah.
They're kind of in a 10 to 15 year cycle toward retirement, right? So yes, you do have a lot of these guys, but you have a crop that's coming up behind them.
I remember as recently as 30 years ago when I had a system building business, a 20 megabyte hard drive was in the thousands.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
It didn't go in commoditized PCs. Big changes. Armando, this has been really fascinating. Really appreciate you taking the time to join me today. If someone wants to learn more about what you're working on or learn more about Neubloc, is LinkedIn the best place to send them?
I encourage you to go to LinkedIn. Encourage you to contact me. But in any event, go to LinkedIn, and there's a whole series of white papers on my LinkedIn that range everything from how does an enterprise move toward AI at the core? What are the strategic decisions that a company has to make to be able to get there? What are the steps, et cetera, et cetera? There is a very useful worksheet called an AI readiness worksheet that can work for a very large company like a smaller company, that gives you a simple scorecard, 0 through 40 points on how really ready you are. And what I like about that scorecard is it focuses on the human issues as much as the technical issues of a company transitioning to AI at the core. And then finally, there is a series of 8 white papers that I recently put out that's a pretty good landscape view of where the AI industry is, how does the US fit competitively against China, what are the implications of that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that series of 8 white papers is it's a long read, but it is a pretty comprehensive view of what's going on in AI right now. And it will be quickly dated because that stuff's moving fast.
We'll make sure to include links to all of those in the blog post and the show notes so listeners, viewers can follow up with those resources. Really appreciate you sharing so generously today, Armando. Look forward to staying in touch and hearing about what you're working on next. I've been speaking with Armando Viteri, who is president and CEO of Neubloc, based in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Thanks, Armando.
Bye-bye.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.